How can you find the middle path if you only walk one side of the road? Feel my heart, feel it racing. Take it where the wild river flows. Rip it out, set only the pain will fade. The memory will linger. You cannot find the middle path if you only walk one side of the road. Thought I knew all the answers, but I had to learn the hard way. Looked you in the eyes this morning, and I swear I saw the sun. I saw the sun go down. You cannot find the middle path if you only walk one side of the road. You cannot find the middle path if you only walk one side of the road. I walk the fine line between a better and a broken man. I walk this lonely road and I ask myself, when will I feel so alive again?
Hi, everyone. Great to have you here on the chat. We have a very exciting guest coming up with us. It's Diana de Cabarrus from. She's tuning in from Spain, actually. So we will talk about developing lyrics, and we will talk about songwriting, as she is really knowledgeable about this topic. We met in Chicago, so let's bring her in here. Hi, Diana.
Hi there. Thank
All
you for
right.
having me. I'm excited to talk about blues lyrics. Hello,
Yeah,
everybody.
Hi. So if you're just in the live stream right now, you're tuning in, let us know. Feel free to let us know where you're tuning in from. And if you have questions for Diana or me, Diana is more of an expert on the side of lyrics and developing lyrics in songs, as well as many other things. And since I'm the only song that I've written that contained lyrics was the song you heard in the intro music for this live stream, and there's one other song, but I'm not that knowledgeable about lyrics, and that's especially why I'm very interested in hearing what you have to say about the topic of writing lyrics for blues songs. And Anything you want to talk about and you want to start off is fine with me. And if there are people in the chat here with us on the live stream, they can also ask questions, of course.
Cool. Well, I think a really good way to start when one thinks about lyrics is to question the assumptions that one has. So when we think about a blues lyric, or we would think about writing a blues lyric or a blues song, what group immediately comes to mind? There's a few things that we can say straight away based on blues lyrics we've listened to. And so one of them would be that there's still a recognizable musical form that the lyrics are happening within, and there are some recognizable themes. So typically there's themes of loss, grief, sorrow. It's a very expressive form that, and one of the reasons I think it's never, it's never going to die as a musical form, because there's such a need for us to achieve a feeling of authentic expression with those deep human themes, and they're very relatable, and no life can pass without some experience of those things. So to have a means of expression that feels quite truthful and authentic is always going to be very important in the art form of music. And in contrast to pop music themes, although there can be a lot of overlap, maybe pop is more associated with fantasy, the fantasies of life going where you want it to, or and blues is the tough passage to emotional maturity of accepting and confronting the reality of loss. Anyway, that's kind of heavy to try and contain all of that in a lyric, but that's maybe some of the things one might think about if you're thinking, well, what do I mean by blues lyric? When you know what the musical parameters are already going to be, this means a couple of things. It means that there is a risk of predictability, but there is also a knowledge of how we're going to pace things. So because the form is going to repeat and we know what that form is, we need to make sure that the lyric supports the progression of the song and the progression of the ideas, and that we do not simply say, I'm really sad because my dog fell down a well, and then repeat some form of, we don't want to restate the idea every time in successive choruses. So I think something that's quite a helpful, concrete thing to latch onto is the idea of development. There may be an expressive goal that we have about expressing something about a more difficult emotion, but our ability to express something is not the same as us just stating that thing a bunch of times. And I think that's once you get that, it becomes a lot easier to create a lyric that builds towards something. But it can seem, when you want to express something in lyrics, that the obvious thing is to say that thing. But if you start with the expression of an emotion in words, it typically does not have a big impact because it hasn't had time to build. And I think grabbing onto the idea of development, for anyone who is a musician already who wants to maybe start writing some lyrics, is really helpful, because we already know about, or have encountered, the idea of development when it comes to solos and musical progressions. A chord progression is called a progression because it moves, and then it's going to arrive back somewhere. And we need the lyrics to do the same thing. So there needs to be development in order for us to remain interested. Otherwise, we had one chorus and then we heard it all, and then well, now I'm bored, and it's a cliche. This is how we stop it from being a cliche. So then once we've got this idea that we have development, and development is one of the ways that we're going to be able to tell a story that evokes an emotion and that allows us to be in whatever emotional terrain we want to be in an effective way. Then there are sort of two aspects to that. One is the actual meaning of the story that we're going to tell, and the circumstances and the people. And the other is what the musical elements are going to be that are associated with the lyrics. So what are the phrasing? How are we going to fit those words over the 12 bars if we're using a 12-bar blues? Where are there going to be spaces? What rhyme is there going to be? What's the timing of the phrases going to be? So we've got the meaning elements and the progression of the meaning through successive choruses. And I'm going to show you I'm just going to give you an example of a framework that we can easily use to do that. And then we've got all the sound elements. And there's definitely some simple guidelines that you can apply to start experimenting and exploring in a way that's going to make that work. So when it comes to when it comes to how we're going to progress a story through different successive choruses of a blues, I'm going to use a Bessie Smith example, and it's called Thinking Blues, and it's pretty old, but essentially she sets up a situation, and she describes what the scenario is, what the problem is, and then she describes what caused this to happen. Then she gives us another angle on how she's experiencing that moment. Then she suggests what a solution might be. And then she describes how we could get to the solution, or what would happen if it's not reached. And all of that gives us a much more 360-degree perspective on what she's describing. So it might sound, the way that I've set that out with, what happened, how's that experience, might not sound very poetic, but you'll see that it fits quite well with her lyrics. And if you break down different sets of blues lyrics, we can usually find something like this happening. So she starts off with it's called Thinking Blues, and she starts off by saying, did you ever sit thinking with 1,000 things on your mind? And then she repeats that line. This is very common, and it's a nice structural thing to do. Did you ever sit thinking with 1,000 things on your mind? And then we get the swing line, thinking about someone who has treated you so nice and kind. So the situation is that she is thinking about someone who's not there, someone who treated her well in the past. She's sort of remembering and reminiscing. And that's quite immediate. It's communicated effectively. The next verse goes, you get an old letter and you begin to read, and then that's repeated. And then it's got the blues so bad, tell that man of mine I wanna be. So now she didn't start off telling us she had the blues. We had a whole verse of, have you ever, and then it's a question, it draws you in. Did you ever sit thinking with 1,000 things on your mind? I mean, that's a really nice immediate connection to make. It's an invitation to participate rather than a bid for your attention. So then this confusion, and we got the old letter. So that's telling us she's set up attention of have you ever felt confused? And then she's given us in the next chorus what's caused this to happen. She got an old letter, or she picked up an old letter and she read it through, and that kind of brought something back with a former flame. And then the next verse goes, don't you hear me, baby, knocking on your door? Don't you hear me, baby, knocking at your door? Have you got the nerve to drive me from your door? So what's another aspect of how this is experienced? First of all, she's been confused and had 1,000 things on her mind. Then we get why this happened, because she found an old letter and she was thinking about this former love. What's another aspect of how she's experiencing this problem? She goes to his house, knocks on the door, and challenges him to tell her that he doesn't want to see her again. And then she says, what might a solution be? Take me back, baby, try me one more time. That's the only way I'm going to get these thinking blues off my mind. So that's what the solution might be. And in that formulation of it, the idea of what would happen if she doesn't arrive at that solution is, that's the only way I'm going to get this off my mind. So if this doesn't happen, I'm going to be stuck in this situation. So there isn't a lot of time in these lines. You've got 2 lines per chorus, so you've essentially got like 10 lines to tell a story. So you got to try and condense things in a way that's quite expressive, and having some sort of way of developing an idea rather than just starting off saying I've got the blues. There's nothing to engage us if we start too soon with that. So this little framework of opening up a scenario or a tension, describing what's caused it to happen, but saving that for a successive chorus, giving us another aspect of how we're experiencing that, suggesting what a solution might be, and then saying what's going to happen if we don't get to the solution. And we can do this with loads of different ones. So with Crossroads, I went down to the crossroads, fell down on my knees. Big problem. The devil's going to get me. What's caused this to happen? With Country Blues, that's another great example. His girl's left him, and if she doesn't come back, he's probably gonna die. And there's a couple of verses in between, but those kind of typical themes of heartbreak and loss are structured in this way. And if you if you take that kind of approach to chopping things into segments that follow along from each other and make sense, now your listener is following the story along with you, and they're invested. And starting with a question, like in Thinking Blues, is also a great way to do it. So there are other things we can add into that, but that idea of structuring the flow of events is a very helpful first kind of scaffolding. And then we're going to get to what words we're going to choose and which words are more expressive and more evocative for the listener, and how we can space those words to be musically interesting. But I wonder, before I go into that, whether, Antony, you might have some thoughts, equivalent kind of scaffolding points that one could think about for developing a solo.
Yeah, because this morning I woke up and I felt very tired. So maybe I could write a song about this. Because in the blues, it's always, this morning I woke up, So.
Woke up this morning and I was, so, well, I mean, we could do a little, like, let's walk this through with the fact that you're very tired as a kind of, to take a scenario that's from a song that doesn't already exist. So yeah, you woke up this morning and you were very tired. There could be something, line 2, then we repeat that. Then line 2 could say something else about the tiredness, like my face felt stuck to my, my head, my skin felt like leather or something. There's a line that basically restates the tiredness, gives us a feeling of the tiredness from another angle. Then the next chorus, what's caused this to happen?
Right.
So then you can say, we're not writing a serious lyric here. It can be anything. It can be, I heard the tap drip all night and it kept me awake because that damn plumber didn't do his work properly. Or it could be anything you want.
I think I should go to the doctors. To find out. But I'm more of a practical guy. No, it's really, really, all kidding aside, it's really deep what you talked about. Like the framework you talked about is really something that I think a lot of too when I'm writing songs. But because I'm writing instrumental music, it's different, but it's also quite the same. Like the development of themes and phrasing. It's essentially when I'm playing lines on the guitar, I'm trying to also go for things that are really lyrical. So instead of playing all over the place, most of the time I try to start off with things that are really lyrical, like easy things like. So it's like a theme variation, right? And I found it easier to think of the guitar like an instrument that I can use to express my inner voice, because I have like not a great voice and I don't want to become a singer or anything like that. So I try to, but I have stories to tell, right? That's why if I'm writing an instrumental song, I'm trying to also build this framework of what is happening, why is it happening, do I need to go to the doctor, why am I so tired. It's like trying to build some frame of thought around the concept that I'm trying to get across, and then it becomes easier for me to latch on to those feelings and then to translate them into sound. So it sounds like for writing lyrics, it's when you talk about the framework and then the development, it's also something very similar that you use to start out the songwriting process for yourself.
Yeah, I think so. I think the key, anything where we can take some knowledge or understanding or concepts we already have and understand that they apply equally in this other area, saves us from the feeling of being like, wow, lyrics is this big mountain over there and I'm like right at the bottom, I have no clue. Actually, you have a lot of clues already. And so I think transferring some of those ideas is very liberating. And so that little first line that you played, that could be our setting up the situation, because you've given us like a key and a rhythm and a little bit of movement. Then the third thing in my little framework was what's another aspect of how this can be experienced or perceived? And that might sound like a slightly laborious way of phrasing it, but musically that could be, we're going to play the same line and end on a different note like you did, or we're going to extend the line a little bit like you did. What in the line underneath that, I've got, what might a solution be? So in most blues lyrics, at some point they refer to the ideal, like if I could just get to home, or if I could just see my love again, or if I could just earn some money. There's usually a suggestion of this resolution, and of course resolution is a very core concept musically speaking as well. So probably at some point in the solo there's going to be we can substitute the word solution for resolution, and it's going to operate in the same way. So there's going to be movement, we're going to be able to experience that in a few different ways, and then there's going to be something that brings it to a resolution at the end, and we've got a lot of choice over how that happens. But what you didn't do was just play the exact same thing 3 times in a row with no variation at all. And that's the same as in a lyric, not just saying, I'm really sad, I'm just so very bereft. And then in the next chorus saying, I've got the blues real bad. We're just saying the same thing. We're not providing any other connecting points. And so there's really nothing for anyone to see or understand or perceive that's refreshed or that's deepened or that's made more meaningful. So they're going to tune out. And there's so does that connect with how you maybe think about structuring solos at all, that you
Yeah, it's
this
funny
idea of
that
how
you mentioned like the variations. I try to think about theme variation often, but it becomes, part of the process. It becomes subconscious at most points. It's not like I sit down and then I start with, like, I practice theme variation, but if I'm playing or writing, I just take my instrument and then try to go for this feeling. And also, it's funny you mentioned the variation, because I really am so bad in playing the same thing twice. So that's why I became blues guitarist. It's like a benefit, but it's also it came from like being inclined to improvisation as a musician. So I always was inclined with to improvise on the instrument. Even when I was little, played piano, always was improvising, and this also became my comfort zone. And I needed to find ways to structure this improvisation, because who would buy a CD full of improvisation? No one. It's like you go to YouTube, you play with a backing track. Who wants to listen to this? It's some guitarists are into this, but I think to really make art, we need to transcend only um, playing in your little comfort zone. At least for me, this was what I needed to do. So that's why I started to look in all of these structures, like theme and variation, development, developing phrases, all the things that other instruments do, like singers, sax players do, play most of the time. Really cool things that are easier to make sound like a melody, like for instance, like this little sax line. It's like when I try to play something like I wouldn't call it solo, it's more a song. When I try to write an instrumental song, I try to go for something that's a starting point, like this little melody, for instance, or something along the lines of a recognizable melody.
Yeah, I think that's very analogous to creating a progression in a story. And because there's going to be, I think you can compare narrative tension to musical tension. And narrative tension is the thing that makes us curious. It's the thing that makes us want to, it's like the clickbait headline. It's the thing that makes us want to hear what's happening next. Without any narrative tension or any musical tension, it becomes not very interesting to listen to quite quickly. It becomes a bit boring and predictable. And because there are some things, there's like things that meet our expectations musically and narratively can be satisfying, but not if there's nothing in between. So I think, yes, I think there's a lot of things that are comparable. Now, when it comes to where let's say that we've got our successive choruses and we want to figure out how we're going to fit the lines onto I'm going to use a 12 bar as an example. I think this is also perhaps quite directly comparable to creating a solo, because it works really nicely to have your line fitting over about 9 beats of the first 16 beats. So lots and lots of blues songs do this. Occasionally somebody will like fill it up and have a little tiny 16th note left at the end of the line. But generally speaking, like in that one I just played, you get an old letter and you begin to read. That's the 9th beat. So Bessie Smith sings it more syncopated than I just did. And then the next line is a repeat of the same lyric. The melody is similar, but the phrasing might change a little bit. So it's not like 100% identical. And we have the chord changing underneath, which also makes it feel a little bit different. And so you mentioned that you always play things twice. And that's quite analogous to what's happening in the lyric in this type of traditional blues lyric format, where there's 2 lines that are the same of words, pretty similar with melody, not identical with chords. And then there's a third line that's different. Typically it's going to have a different melody. It's going to have different lyric, and it's going to bring that to a close. And then we're going to hear the next one, which is going to be similar to the first one. And that's going to start us on the next cycle. So and in that little gap at the end of the lyric, that's typically where one might hear a fill from one of the musicians or something in the band. Not necessarily, but that's a good place for it. So if anybody out there is thinking, well, I'd quite like to have a shot at writing a blues lyric, what do I do? That would be a great place to start. I can paste this little progression into the chat, and you could take your theme or your idea or your initial starting point and write some lines that progress through those stages. So you'd end up with 4. You'd end up easily with 4 or 5 verses. And then you would try and arrange your words over the kind of 9-ish bars. And you can come in a little bit. Other things that are going to distinguish the musical elements of where the lyrics are sitting is going to be some syncopation, especially in a slower blues, to stop it feeling like it drags. Very often the vocalist is going to come in like just before beat 1 of the bar. And there might be some words that are stretched out a lot more than you would find typically in pop. So if you listen to that Bessie Smith song, she's got got an old, and you begin to read, you get an old letter, and the word you gets really, really stretched out. And then other things might be really, really short. So that variation in the rhythm is one of those invisible things that we don't really notice unless we specifically concentrate on it. But it massively, it's the element that hugely distinguishes one line from another line, one phrase from another phrase, one lyric from another lyric. If you've got the same basic chord structure, and there's quite a lot of similarity in what one might be doing melodically, the element that's really free is the rhythm, or where you have lots and lots of scope of what you do with it. So the reason why it's quite nice to stick to the constraint of 9 beats is it stops you trying to put too many words in. And part of the simplicity and directness of a great blues lyric is that you can really hear what's happening, and you can really feel what's happening, because there's not like a ton of there's not a ton of words like coming at you that your brain has to disentangle. There's the statement, then there's a little space for it to reverberate in you. Then we get it restated with something slightly modified so we can still really absorb it and take it in. And then we get a variation. And then the next time around, we get progression. I think the rhythmic aspect also correlates in a way that's very easy to understand musically when one is thinking about solos and when one's thinking about how variation can be brought into blues. There's obviously going to be lots of things you can do with note choices for soloing and range and register and many other elements. But I think the rhythm is something that's super powerful. It affects how we feel emotionally in a way that we barely even perceive. You can build up a lot of tension using rhythm. You can release that tension. It's like a complete superpower, both with where you're placing your lyrics and melody notes and with your soloing. Is that something that you are into?
No, not at
Really?
all. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I hate rhythm.
I use a lot of rhythm, Diana. No, of course, yeah. When I'm playing solos, like what you were mentioning about the theme and variation, that's something like the form, the phrasing form. Like when you said that I always play the same thing twice, but like with a little variation for people who are here on the live stream or watching afterwards, and I want to get some exercise with this. What you could do is like once you developed like a theme, like the thing I was playing earlier, you could play it in a higher register like Diana says, but you could also play with like the rhythm, like what Diana was mentioning, and then for instance swap one of the notes to get some interest, and the less predictable it becomes, the easier for the listener to latch on, like what Diana was saying when she was talking about developing the whole thing. So it looks like there are many similarities between phrasing on the guitar and building lyrics or phrases for songs. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, and I think it's helpful when if you don't have a lot of experience writing lyrics, but it's something you're interested in, you can feel like, how am I going to get started? I guess I just could choose some words. There are like 150,000 words I could choose from, which at least with guitar solo, if you're using a pentatonic, there's like 5 notes. That's a helpful constraint. So when you have some means of planning how your lyrics are going to go and where they're going to go, it makes those choices feel a bit less random and a bit less trial and error. So another thing that if you might be now thinking, okay, well, that all makes sense. I can see how that works. How am I going to do that? How do I take something and develop it? And the easiest way to do that is to basically ask questions of your starting point. So if we were to, let's imagine that we choose a note. There's going to be notes that are near that note. Which notes are near it? No, which notes are far away? What relationship does it have to the chords that I'm hearing? There's immediately some questions that we can ask of it that might dictate what we do next. And with any item of meaning, let's imagine I give you the image of a police car. So there's things that are associated with police car. What are the types of people who are going to be that you're going to think about when you think about police car? What does it look like? What would it feel like to sit on the seats? What would the texture of the fabric be like? What would it smell like? What other objects would be there? What other objects are in the scale or the key of police car? And when you start thinking about those people and the environment and what there would be to say about it, then what types of drama might typically occur? There might be somebody getting handcuffed, there might be somebody being released, there might be somebody getting advised, there might be somebody being stopped, there might be somebody being chased. There is an association of congruent possibilities clustering around any event or any image or any object that you can start gathering and then organizing using this little scaffolding. So if you got your little central nugget, and that could be an image or an object like a police car, or a situation, a setting, it could be an emotion, and you start generating ideas of what is in the world of that emotion. You then have you have raw material that you've collected, which you can start putting into this framework. So in a concise way, that is a more viable and workable way of answering a question, how do I go about writing a lyric, or a blues lyric, than simply starting out with, well, I'm really sad because life is hard. You could take that as a first line and make it work, but does that make sense? That if you have in mind that you're going to progress something before you even know what that thing is. And then you have in mind how you can generate more ideas from one kind of either setting or emotion or scenario starting point. Even with emotions, there's other emotions that are adjacent to them. If I'm talking about agitation or like a state of agitation, there's the adjacent emotions would be anxiety, stress, distress, shock, surprise, disappointment. They're not exactly the same thing, but they're all other versions of those things. And so if I was writing my blues lyric and I wanted to convey that, when I got to the question 2, which is what is another aspect of how we can experience this, though I could reach from all of that area, but it's hard to come up with those things unless you ask yourself some question, and then it becomes easy. I think people always think about coming up with ideas for songs or coming up with lines as being like, just have to think really hard and then something's going to come out. And when you do that, it's very hard. But when you ask yourself a question, it becomes quite easy because you immediately have a lot of things you can answer. And you may not like the answers that you provide, but that's a separate question to do with perfectionism. And that's, certainly perfectionism, we want to kind of put that to one side, but it's not the same as I can't think of anything. If you ask yourself enough questions, you will be able to think of things. So basically, when it comes to blues, we've got this idea that there may be lots of concepts you already know relating to music that apply in equal measure to lyric writing. So you at least conceptually may have a lot more resources than you realized. Then specific to the blues, we've got this idea of restating something that's restated and then a swing line and where they're going to be placed. So we know roughly how long those lines are going to be. There's probably going to be, there might be one phrase per bar. Again, if I go back to the Bessie Smith example, first bar's got, you get an old letter, and that fits more or less over the first bar, and you begin to read. Second bar lands on a ninth beat, and then we're to the next line. So once you've got that, you've got the progression, you've worked out how you can create more associations and more material from an initial scenario or emotion, and you arrange it into that, you're going to have something that is not very trial and error. It's going to be quite thought through, and it stands a much greater chance of you really enjoying performing it because you can get behind it, because you know a lot of thought's gone into it and you know it kind of makes sense and works and develops. And those ideas equally transferable to solos. So yeah, I don't know if there are any questions.
That's awesome advice, Diana. Thanks so much for this. Because as a total noob songwriting, lyric writing noob, it's become really proficient to hear you talk about all these concepts, and especially since I come from instrumental music and improvisation, phrasing, to see the relationship between those two. So thank you.
You are very welcome.
All right. Cool. So if there are no questions, we have something really special. Diana has a cool thing going on, and it's a guide that she's giving away on the website songwritinglessonsonline.com. So maybe you can talk us through this. What is it, Diana?
So essentially, it's the things that I wished I'd known when I started out. For anyone who maybe hasn't thought about writing lyrics in detail before and would like to get started, but does not want to simply stare at a piece of paper and chew their pencil and write something and cross it out, this ebook has got a lot of training activities that you can do to establish a writing practice, and it's got some key ideas that have made the biggest difference to my songwriting that I didn't know when I started out, because like most people, I started out very informally, just with my guitar and making it up in every respect. And I had no real way of evaluating whether it was good or not, or whether it was fit for purpose, other than, do I like it? And some days I liked it and other days I didn't. So that wasn't very good either. So this has some specific criteria that you can use to know what it is that you're aiming to accomplish with your lyrics. And a lot of training activities that don't take very long, they just take 5 minutes or 7 minutes, depending which they are, that you can start experimenting and testing out. And it has a little writing calendar that you can also use to get yourself in the habit of doing writing activities. Because I think one of the biggest misconceptions with writing lyrics is that you're going to sit down with a pen and you're going to start with line 1 of the first verse and you're going to write your lyric. And it may work that way sometimes, and we will thank the song fairy for times when that happens, but it's unlikely to be either enjoyable, consistent, or produce your best material, because typically you're going to get a more refined expression of what it is that you want to communicate when you've dug a bit deeper than that. So the 5 Ways to Write Great Lyrics has got the activities and the ways to think about it that I wished I'd known when I started out.
Right. Or you could always just kidnap the song fairy, right? What is she called? Songwriting fairy?
Well, I think everyone's songwriting fairy is called something different.
Songwriting fairy. Right on. So I also have a guide for the people who are into blues guitar. So in that guide, you learn all the tricks and licks to connect chords with riffs and chord progression. So it's on my website, bestbluesguitarlessonsonline.com. You can find it on the homepage or through the link below. And before we'll leave it at that, let me thank everyone who was here on the stream with Diana. Oh, sorry. With me and Diana. I really enjoyed it. I hope everyone got something out of it, and I sure did. So thanks a lot, Diana, and have a great time over there. You're in Spain right now, I think.
Thank you very much. I love talking about the blues with you. Have a lovely evening in Belgium, and I look forward to your song about the pains of sleeplessness.
Nice. Okay. I'll manage to get that somewhere at the end of next month to you. All right, Diana. Thank you again.
Bye.
Thank you, everyone. Bye.